I would like to tell you a bit about multi-cloud, meaning next step in cloud usage that I believe is extremely important, but I would like also to invite you for a demo of that platform that is just behind the lunch area. But before I start, just a few words of comments about what is happening here, because I believe it's extremely important to see that open source approach evolution that happened over the last 20 years is enormous. And as Cedric Thomas said in the very beginning, starting from individuals, that's more or less what I did something like, I don't know, 21, 22 years ago, then building ecosystem, building enterprises around it, building industry around it. It's a huge success story, and I respect the work of organizations like OW2 and all the people behind, that they make it simply, in some cases, possible, or at least easier. So it's not a surprise that most of the companies globally now take advantage of the cloud computing. It's much cheaper, much faster, much more efficient from a human perspective to, instead of building your own infrastructure, to use existing one from specialized providers, at least in the most of the cases. According to last year's survey, about almost 4/5 of all companies globally use some form of cloud computing. But the three leading suppliers, all of them from different continents, have about 80% of the market. And there is a huge risk of vendor lock-in. I know organizations that are early adopters of the cloud computing model, large organizations that are started so early without any good practices around, without practical experiences around, that if they started with AWS, actually it's pretty much impossible to move away from AWS. That is a very good provider, but far from perfect. So what I believe in is that if open source movement was a way of maturing software industry in such a way to avoid vendor lock-in, then cloud computing, and especially multi-cloud approach, is a way to stay independent of those few main cloud providers that may be a bottleneck in the future. That's why I will give samples from US, because unfortunately that market is more developed than ours. But on the other hand, we can use their experience and not to commit this, to have same mistakes as some of them did. So now, vast majority of American companies that use cloud plan to launch multi-cloud, meaning use then more than just one cloud provider. Vendor lock-in is the main driver. Even if main providers give access to some custom tools, pre-integrated frameworks, etc., it's advantage, but it's also a risk, especially as there are some elements that are not available from them or extremely expensive. So I strongly believe that multi-cloud or even cross-cloud, meaning using simultaneously various cloud provider, is an only option for efficient cloud usage that could, at least for some, mean competitive advantage on the market. Why? Because costs of that of that cloud computing could matter regarding the price of the service or product that is offered at the end of the road. So what are those advantages? I mentioned avoiding vendor lock-in. That is tightly connected with all the others, simply that we can select the best services from each player. We can optimize the costs. We can consider various kinds of security, like GDPR compliance, that we can process personal data in locations or at providers that support regulatory expectations. We can scale more easily, not just using 2 or 3 global providers that provide reasonable coverage globally, but we can be close to the customers that we want to serve using maybe smaller providers that are more distributed and also cover the world. Of course, there are challenges around. The first critical challenge is how to simply integrate. These are many players with different APIs, different management platform, administration platforms, providing various frameworks, how to optimize their usage, not manually, because of course that's always possible and easy, and how to do it in a secure way. That's why I believe that that it's important to offer both framework from software perspective, but also process to support it. As with the cloud, being in the cloud is easy. Being on-premise is also relatively easy. It has some constraints, but the biggest problem is how to move from one state to another without disrupting the business if we have many systems, hundreds of servers, and we cannot accept downtime for the moment of migration, the moment that could last for months. So it's really analyzing where we are, designing, okay, that maybe the place we would like to be at, but considering the migration time, that it's not immediate, especially in large organizations, we also need to manage the change of our requirements. Designing the migration plan and then implementing it, and really focusing on measuring what we do, how we do, whether we achieve what we want to achieve, and if not, how to adapt. So a couple of years ago, diagnosing those problems that since that time became even bigger, we decided to implement, basing on some very good European projects, a platform called Melodic. That is a framework to optimize multi-cloud usage for even very complex applications. So it's cross-cloud. It supports serverless mode through one of the follow-on projects. It's fully open source. And what is actually the most difficult part, I'm a technical person, so software is the easy part. What turned out to be the most difficult is to build community around this software. So it does not end with the end of the project, with end of the European budget, but it's sustainable to the future. But I believe that we succeeded with that. So we are able to automatically deploy complex applications from various suppliers to the cloud that is not limited to Docker. So it could be virtual machines, it could be containers, with support to various big data and serverless models. We have central authentication authorization, and what is the key, it's enterprise ready. 7Bulls works for large companies all around the world, including some well-known French companies. So we are aware what is needed to match their requirements. Just to give you a real-life sample that maybe will convince you that it brings real value, I'll describe a use case of a startup AI investments that does more or less what the name says, simply provides a platform for AI-based automated investments. And they started 18 months ago and were able to build a product that is multi-cloud based within 12 months, based on early release of the Melodic, because Melodic, it's a Horizon 2020 project, meaning it's a consortium of both academia that are extremely good, but not really aware how to deliver production-ready software that could be maintained for years, and some technology companies. So we asked the consortium and succeeded here simply to divide the project into 3 releases, that each of them, including the very first one that was in the early second year of the project, ended up with useful software that can be used by commercial partners. That happened. We have multiple commercial partners using that software, including one very large French brand. So AI investments is extremely complex from technical perspective, because they need to be close to the markets, meaning financial markets that are scattered all over the world. So they need to keep the presence on various markets on 4 continents. They need proper auto-scaling for that, to be able to efficiently manage budget depending on the load, because the needs change very rapidly. But on the other hand, the platform itself relies strongly on neural networks. Training neural networks is a good sample of a problem that is not well addressed by main cloud providers. We did some research that huge chunk of R&D budget of companies in Europe end up in Amazon pockets, just because everybody uses cloud. Most of them use Amazon or Microsoft, sometimes some other. And the way they do that, simply if we go to Amazon, we do everything in Amazon, is extremely ineffective from economic point of view. All those main players have extremely expensive GPUs in the cloud that are a basis for most of the AI projects nowadays. So, but actually there is a very good offering in Europe from local cloud providers that observe that there is a niche that could be addressed. Unfortunately, that niche has not been noticed by most of the startups that still push a lot of money to those main cloud providers. So for AI investments, the actually not implementation operation cost in the first year was $72,000 US. It was a significant part of their R&D budget, but the worst solution that turned out to be from the leading cloud provider, global cloud provider, would be more than 3 times more expensive. So the difference is significant. And actually the difference between the multi-cloud approach, meaning picking up the best offering from each available provider in particular case, and the best offer of one provider, meaning we take everything from one, just select the cheapest one, was also more than $100,000 US. So it's very easy to spend a few times more than you need. Of course, the question is whether the money is the only good measure. It's not, of course, at least unless we consider also human costs. So Melodic provides that automation, that optimization automatically. Simply we describe the measures. The measures do not need to be only money driven. It can be response that's response side driven. It can be legal constraints driven, like what I said, please process all the personal data that are subject to GDPR in EU data centers, etc. So that platform that is fully open source, I believe that strongly matters for both small and large companies. The difference of the financial side of the project for large systems, large companies could be significantly larger. However, this case is especially compute intensive. It's regular retraining of tens of thousands of neural networks, so it's a pretty compelling.